So, welcome to the Narkis St Bible Study for this week. We're looking at Esther as it is Purim, or we've just finished Purim here in Jerusalem and then in Israel as well. Jerusalem gets 2 days being a walled city, and today is the day after, but Purim time. And so we're dedicating this Bible study to Esther and the hidden hand of God in Esther. So I'll just open with prayer. Lord, thank you so much for bringing each person here tonight. Thank you for your word and that so many things, everything rings true over thousands of years and throughout different cultures. And thank you that you speak to us through it. And the more we learn, the more excited we are to know you more. And I pray that each one of us would know you more. And we thank you for your love and your protection and your plan. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, can't jump ahead. So I titled this The Hidden Hand of God in Esther. Some of you may have heard me talk before on Esther because it's something I wrote way back in my first degree on irony in Esther, and it's really opened my eyes to seeing some things. Anyway, so I've shared it in different formats, but I thought I'd share it tonight with this crowd. And so if you've heard it before, hopefully it will just reinforce, so you'll get something new out of it. I know for me, when I re-listen to something or a good book I really liked, I'll get something new every time. And it helps me as well to see something new. So we're going to look at the hidden hand of God in Esther on this Purim 2026. I heard a friend say that the summary of Jewish feasts goes like this: they tried to kill us, they didn't succeed, let's eat. It's funny. It's you think about it, Passover, it's all kind of the same. This threat, it doesn't happen, and party. And it's hard to imagine that happening in life, but it is kind of a coping mechanism. But there's something deeper behind this kind of like ironic situation. I mean, actually right now in the modern world, it's also feeling a little ironic because we have the Revolutionary Guard in Iran that is very anti-Israel, sending missiles over here. And yet I'm in my friend's house eating and celebrating his early birthday. So there are always ironies to life. But what is behind this irony? And the book of Esther has been shocking to many people throughout the ages for various reasons. Martin Luther, if you remember, wasn't so keen on the book. He didn't like it a lot. He kind of wished it weren't in the Bible. I'm very glad it is in the Bible, but you've got to understand it to appreciate it. But the shocking thing, we all know no God mentioned in the Bible. Nothing. His name, the word God, or his private name, Yud He Vav He, none of it's mentioned in the Bible once. There's no prayer in the Bible, and some people miss this one because it mentions fasting, and so we automatically associate prayer and fasting, which is not a bad thing. I think most people do, but it is specifically not mentioned. And then you've just got these crazy topics. There's all this feasting going on. And in Hebrew, mishteh, a feast is actually a drinking party. Mishteh is from lishtot, to drink. And so, this political intrigue, and it doesn't seem very righteous or very serious. And so it confuses people. What is this book doing in the Bible? And so it actually creates a bit of a debate. If you look in a scholarly world, you'll find that there's a debate about the origins. Where does Esther come from? Was it originally this non-religious story that was adapted to become the Bible out of popularity, and so it became this Purim festival? Or was a book of Esther originally intended to be in the Bible? And so obviously that's in a more scholarly, non-believing context that there's that debate. But the roots of that debate come from this confusion of the style of this book, and it It's not like the other books. And then some would point out also it wasn't found in Qumran. And so, okay, what is this strange little book and how did it come to be in the Bible? Other things, it's talking about genocide of a people group as if it's just like a whimsical thing. And, there's like these reversals and there's these celebrations and it's very carnivalesque. And that can also be confusing. So is this flippancy? Is it sacrilegious, this kind of style? Or is there something else going on? And I would say the key to understanding the book of Esther is a literary analysis. And don't be scared by that. Because the Bible is more than good literature. But it is not less than good literature. And this is really true across the board. And when you think of it, the God of the universe who created all this beauty, why shouldn't he be the best literary example that there is? Why should we expect less? And yet, so often I think maybe a bit out of fear, we read the Bible more like a newspaper, like just give me the data points and not like literature. But then we're going to miss the point sometime. And that's my point. So the Bible's more than good literature, but it is not less than good literature. So please stick that in your head and read it as good literature. So being good literature, it always makes you read between the lines. Like all human communication, every time we open our mouths to say something or write it, we communicate in more than just the words we say. And we assume things and we assume you understand what we're trying to say. And a lot of the times we're completely unaware that we're asking each other to read between the lines. For instance, if I say, do you get it? Get it. You haven't received anything, but you've understood something. My literal words were idiomatic or, oh, I see. Well, I'm not talking about my eyes. I'm saying, oh, I see. I'm talking that I understand. And so in many ways, many idioms in all languages, we say things that the literal words of what we're saying is not actually what we're trying to say. And of course, it gets much more sophisticated after that. So where is God in this crazy little book of Esther? And I would say he's only there when you read between the lines. And was that intended? Well, absolutely. When I look at the book, especially if you're reading this book in the original language, in the Hebrew, there are all kinds of little literary links. So what do I mean by that? A way of saying something that mimics another story in the Bible, where you read it and you're like, oh, they're talking about that. Like when it says a kingdom will be taken from Vashti and given to a friend who is better than her. Oh, well, that just brings you right back to King David and Saul and that exact same phrase. And so these literary links are not coincidental. They're all over the place. They connect you to stories with, we're going to look at some of them, but Daniel and Joseph and all kinds of stories. So when Esther is being written, it's definitely intentional that it's biblical because it's connecting to all these other biblical stories in a very beautiful, artistic way. So if you allow for the irony, many things become more clear that wouldn't be if you're just going to read on a superficial level. So before we dig into Esther, I want to just remind ourselves what we're talking about when we say what is irony. So I have one joke I like to use, and maybe it's telling that it's funny to me. It might not be funny to you, but let's try it. So there's a linguistics conference, and there's a presentation for all these nerds who like language and grammar. And so they're discussing all the ways for making a negative in languages. So you can have a single negative, like no. You can have a positive that means a negative. And quite commonly, a language may have a double negative. So if you've ever studied French, you know they have a double negative, like n'est pas. And Hebrew has Af pa'am lo. See, double negative. And English, even in non-standard dialect, has a double negative, which my son likes to use. I ain't got nothing. Well, he doesn't say the ain't. I don't have nothing. Something like that. So double negative. Then the speaker proceeded to say, but there isn't any language where a double positive makes a negative. And from the back of a room, a voice said, yeah, right. So if that made you chuckle, then you perceive what I'm talking about by irony, when what you say or do is exactly opposite from what is intended. So in this context, when I say, yeah, right, I'm not saying, yes, that is correct. I'm saying it's wrong. But the actual words are, yes, correct. So, and in this case, of course, is funny because he's giving an example of a double positive that is actually negative. So it's the very thing he said was impossible, he's actually giving an example for. And we have that in the story of Esther, if you think about it, because, well, we'll get to that. But the very thing that they set out to do, before we even get to the Jews and everything, just Esther, the first scene with the king and wanting, all women to obey their husbands everywhere, that actually gets reversed. So, irony. It's a rhetorical device or a literary technique or even an event in which what appears on the surface to be the case differs radically from what actually is the case. So you could have a verbal irony, like the yeah, right example, or you could have an event irony. And you can have dramatic irony, where you know something that a character in the story doesn't know. Like when Haman goes in to see the king, and we know what the king is thinking, but Haman doesn't know that. So it adds tension for us. These are all cases of irony. Specific to Esther, I think a key component is this burlesque, because it really does pervade the whole book. So burlesque is a type of irony. It's a literary or dramatic work that seeks to ridicule by means of grotesque exaggeration or comic imitation, like a parody or a caricature. We laugh when we see these things. It's dealing with something petty or insignificant in a very serious, formal manner. That can be funny. Or dealing with something very serious in a flippant or casual manner. And so I would say that the book of Esther, it's this sense of burlesque that confuses people, because you have something very serious, like the fate of a nation, being treated flippantly and in this like cavalier way of what's all this feasting and party, and doesn't make sense. Except it does in a burlesque way. So burlesque is a kind of irony that seeks to entertain and correct the wrong in society through this entertainment. Burlesque often makes use of exaggeration to point to the ridiculous in any given situation. And as I said, this we see it all over Esther. And that's what this tension is we feel between this silly, flippant level and this very serious level. So a lot of people can't handle that. Again, if you're not looking at it through eyes of literature, it's jarring. If you're reading it like a newspaper, you're like, what is going on? I see this carnival. I see all this crazy silliness going on. And yet we're dealing with genocide and its reversal and all these very important topics. And so a lot of people, they want one or the other. But there's actually power in the beauty of literature, that it can pack a point even stronger than if I did write it as a newspaper. So I think the beauty of the irony actually accentuates the points of the book. And so in the end, it can be both silly and serious at the same time. And the silliest might accentuate the seriousness. And so if we let it be what it is, it will have a power. The message will be more powerful. So another reason to use irony in general, it's not just used in Esther in the Bible, elsewhere, it can expose falsehood and stupidity. Like when people do a little parody of something going on in their society, all of a sudden it makes us see things we didn't see before. It recognizes foolishness and pretense. It mocks those who think they are something when they are actually nothing. So it kind of reminds us of who really is something. God is above it all. And on this plane, we got a lot of topsy-turvy, backward people. Now, there is risk involved if you use irony, especially in a written document. As I'm speaking now, I can use emphasis in my voice, and I can use a tone to make you know I'm being a little bit non-literal. I'm being playful with what I say. When you write, it's a little harder. We're expecting that the reader will understand. And that can be harder for us today because Esther was written down in a time and place very different from ours, in a culture, in a language different than ours. So what is assumed in that culture and language may be different than what we assume today. And so to really understand, we have to try to put ourselves back there. And so there is a risk involved, but the payoff is big as well. So we don't want to be a reader who refuses to see the sophistication of the text, and we don't want to miss the point of Esther. We do want to understand the book. So, we don't have time tonight to read through the whole book of Esther, because there are 10 chapters, and it would be too much. I'm hoping some of you may have read it recently. It is Purim, and a time where often it's read here in the synagogues, less so in the non-Jewish world. But if you remember the opening scene, there's this big, exaggerated party in the Persian kingdom. And this king Ahasuerus in Hebrew, which is mostly connected to Xerxes, so the Greek name Xerxes, he's trying to show off to his world, his little empire of 127 provinces, just how great his kingship is. And so it's 180 days long. That's a long time to be having this drinking party. And there's all these lavish decorations. And if you look at the decorations, they're actually some of the very expensive materials you would find in the temple as well. It mentions the blue and the purple that are special dye. You have to crush, I forget how many shells of Phoenicia to get this dye. And only the rich people in the day had it. And gold and silver. And I remember I took a course on Esther in university, and I remember them mentioning that in Persia, it is true that people showed off by their drinking utensils. So they'd have these fancy gold goblets in the shape of a lion or stuff like that, silver. And that was like your status symbol. In the same way today, maybe people would get a fancy car. If you have a Lamborghini or a Porsche, you're somebody. I don't know. So the king has lavish decorations, and just, everyone, can eat and drink as much as they want. And in this context of showing off to the world of his grandeur and how great he is, he all of a sudden has a personal tiff with his wife. Okay, so if you're to understand the Persian culture at that time, the men had separate banquets from the women, and the only women who would go into the men's banquet were courtesans, which is a fancy word for a call girl or prostitute. So, if you're the king's wife, and the king has been drinking for several days with his buddies, and he calls you in to show off your beauty, what would you say? I think the most proper thing to say would be like, no, that is not appropriate. I am a dignified woman. How on earth would you ask me to go into this, feast with a bunch of men? I'd be reducing myself to a prostitute. No, of course not. So that would be the expected thing. But he, of course, he may be a little tipsy, and he blows up this personal tiff. He feels like offended that, oh, she told me no. Well, what am I going to do? And so he blows this up between him and his wife, a request that he should never have made in the first place. And now he makes this national, not only national, international affair. And much before modern media. And he's like, well, what should be done? She's telling me no. Well, of course she's telling you no. But to get the impact of when I say blows it up into this big ordeal, I made in red here. I have the Hebrew on top and the English on the bottom. All. And just read it and think about how many times the word all comes. Memuchan, who's an advisor of the king, replied to the king and the officials, the wrong of Queen Vashti is not against the king alone, but against all the officials and all the people who are throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the matter concerning the queen will spread to all the women, leading them to treat their husbands with contempt, saying when King Ahasuerus gave orders to bring Queen Vashti into his presence, she would not come. And this very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media who have heard the matter concerning the queen will respond in the same way to all the royal officials, and there will be more than enough contempt and anger. Now, some people don't see the exaggeration there. I find it hard not to see. It was not an offense in the first place. It was an expected reaction to say no, and they're making it like, oh no, this is catastrophic, and now everyone, everywhere, for all times, is going to be chaotic. No woman's going to obey her husband. What shall we do? And it's highly ironic because the rest of the story is about how Esther initiates and does not obey her husband and is successful. So it's kind of turned on its head. But you see the kind of exaggerating this situation that didn't need to be exaggerated. So then they decide to pass a law to counter this perceived effect that there's going to be this chaos in all the kingdom, to ensure that every man will rule in his household, because this apparently is really important to ensure. And yet, like I said, this is the very law that's disproved in the rest of the book, in the telling of the story itself, where the husbands listen to their wives. Even Haman listens to his wife Zeresh. Thinking, is that chapter 7, down after the first feast? And Esther herself, she's taking initiative and comes up with her own idea. So the very thing the book sets out as this perceived threat is reversed. Let's look at King Ahasuerus. What does he care about most? So I think he as a character is already a caricature of sorts. And I didn't meet the real Ahasuerus. I don't know how closely. I used to think, characters, well, no king could be like that. But I don't know. I think we have some leaders today that remind me of Ahasuerus. Because he's whimsical. He's into his own wealth, wine, women, and all the important things that he should be concerned about, he kind of sidelines. Oh yeah, whatever you think is good. Yeah, great. And then everything that should be on the side, like your party, that's like his main job. And that's what he's preoccupied with. So the stated goal of the story is to enforce the word of the king. This is supposed to be irrevocable, and everyone will fear and obey it. And yet throughout the story, the king is actually following everyone else's advice. He doesn't initiate anything. And so it is kind of poking at that concept. Oh, you think Persian law is so irrevocable, and you think you as king of all these provinces have such power. Well, really you don't. And I'm going to show it to you like this. So that's a funny poke on the king Ahasuerus. Mordechai and Esther also have quite dignified heredity. If you look at Esther 2:5, it introduces Mordechai. Now there happened to be a Jewish man in Susa, or Shushan in Hebrew, the citadel, the capital, whose name was Mordechai. He was a son of Yair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. I have, for those who like Hebrew, underneath it. So, who does that remind us of? We hear Kish, and we hear Benjamin, and we think of Saul. Then we get Haman's heredity in Esther 3:1. And it says he is a Agagi. The LXX, the Greek translation actually takes that away, which I think is really unfortunate because that's one of our keys for understanding who this Haman person is. Bureos. That really blurs the distinction, but we're going to keep Agagi. So sometime later, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, exalting him and setting his position above that of all the officials who were with him. Okay, so with these two hints, the heredity of these characters, we see that there's a reference already. So we have King Saul on the one side, we have King Agag on the other side. If you remember King Agag from 1 Samuel 15, he was the king of Amalek. And Saul and Amalek had a battle together. So, in a sense, Mordechai and Esther are a rematch of Saul and Agag's battle. So now Mordechai and Esther, who are descendants from Saul, are battling Haman, who is a descendant of Agag. But this is also a rematch of the very first battle. And so Agag is the king of Amalek. He goes back to Amalek. Amalek was the first people to attack Israel when it came out of Egypt. So we have this little story in Exodus 17, verses 8 through 16. And we have a reference in the law to this story in Deuteronomy 25, verses 17 through 19. So the things that they have in common, this Amalek, there is no incentive stated for why they would attack Israel. Israel was not going through their land. It wasn't taking something from them. There was no reason they needed to attack. There was no justification. It was just they wanted to attack Israel. So they appear out of the blue. They attack them for no given reason. So much so that in Jewish interpretation, Amalek becomes a spiritual heredity because it's unexplainable. Well, for one, how it would continue generation to generation, but there doesn't seem to be any reason given for why this people group would be attacking. So it must be more than the people group. Every other people group, we have someone who would redeem that people group. So for the Moabites, we have Ruth. For Canaanites, we have Rahav in Jericho. And there's all these individuals that stand out and they kind of bring some redemption. But for Amalek, we have no character who would redeem this people group. So it seems to be more than a people group. It seems to be a spiritual people who is just against Israel. That's their main thing, to be against Israel. And, no reason given. And so in our story, in Genesis 17 that we're about to read, and also in Deuteronomy, the punishment fitting this crime is that they're wiped out from under the heaven. If you intended to wipe this people group out from under the heaven for no reason, well, that will be your punishment. So now we see this rematch of Mordechai, Esther, and Haman, go back to Saul, Agag, go back to Israel and Amalek. So we have to go back to the very first battle with Amalek, as I said, was in Exodus 17. And it starts verse 8 and 9. And as I said, Amalek is not introduced, doesn't say who they are, who their king is, where they lived, just like they come out of the blue. Then came Amalek and attacked Israel in Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out, fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." So Joshua fought against Amalek just as Moses had instructed him. And Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses would raise his hands, then Israel prevailed. But whenever he would rest his hands, Then Amalek prevailed. Okay, so it's easy to read this part really quickly, but we have Joshua commanding a battle down the battlefield. Moses and friends go up on the hill. And if you read it in context in Exodus 17, they're at the mountain of God. So it's not just any hill, for the record, which maybe is more serious of an offense. If someone's attacking Israel right before they receive Torah at the mountain of God, it's that much worse. Anyway, you have this battle. Whenever is an important little word there because it implies this is not a one-time thing. And you see that in the Hebrew grammar as well. And it would be, vehaya. This is not a one-time thing. This is a way we say something that happened several times. It's habitual. So whenever he would raise his hands, Israel would prevail. Whenever he would lower his hands, Amalek would prevail. So can you imagine this? This in itself is where I see burlesque in the original story, because we have like, you're winning, you're losing, you're winning, losing, winning, losing. You could get a conductor of an orchestra going, and it's kind of scary. Like the whole fate of the people, what? Win, lose, win, lose. And actually, if you read it in its context, you will also see that the story before, the people were doubting God. Is God really with us? And so it's as if, and this is also, I'm giving you a lot of information quickly, but in Jewish interpretation, they understand this to be a kind of a little spank, like a little reminder, let's say. It's not politically correct anymore to say spank, but like, oh, you doubted I'm with you? Well, I'm going to prove it to you. I'm here, I'm not. I'm here, I'm not. Like, so in the act of saving them, it's also kind of proof, a little scientific experiment. Like, here I am, now I'm not. And I'm just going to be like this switch. Moses' hands is going to turn the switch on and off so that you know that I'm real and I'm really here. So, when the hands of Moses became heavy, they took a stone and put it under him. And Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and one on the other. And so his hands were steady until the sun went down. So Joshua destroyed Amalek and his army with the sword. So the nice thing here, if you're reading in Hebrew, his hands were emunah. They were steadiness. So this word, it can also be faith, and it can also be faithfulness. It is, of course, in a physical understanding here at the battle scene, but it can have, like any good word, it can have double meanings. And so the fact that it's also the word for faith counts for something. Especially since the people had just doubted whether God was with them or not. And now his hands are faith. So in this whole context of the first battle, we see that there is a repeated up and down theme. Like I mentioned, the light switch. It's like, you want proof that I'm here? Now I'm here, now I'm not. Now I'm here, now I'm not. On, off, on, off. And the other thing to notice is that Amalek and Israel are mutually exclusive. If one is winning, the other is not. It's not one of these gray things. It's like either they're winning or they're winning. They can't both win here. And so the whole way this battle between Israel and Amalek is presented actually has a lot of burlesque in it, in its nature. And I think when Esther was written, it was in view because the people of God already had the book of Exodus and Deuteronomy when the story of Esther is given. And so I think the writing of Esther is actually imbued with some of the same ideas or style that's presented in the Exodus that they're picking up on, drawing from the Exodus style and using it in Esther. So, I'm still back finishing the story of Amalek's battle in Exodus. The Lord said to Moses, "Write this as a memorial in the book and rehearse it in Joshua's hearing, for I will surely wipe out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven." Moses built an altar and he called it, "The Lord is my banner." For he said, For a hand was lifted up to the throne of the Lord, that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. This is a little verse that is very, very difficult to understand. I'll read it in Hebrew for anyone who cares. Vayomer ki yad al kesya milhama ladonai ba'amalek midor dor. So it's hard to translate. There is no verb there. Your translation already fills it in. A hand was lifted up. It just says, and he said, for a hand on throne of God. So whose hand? Is this God's hand swearing? Is this Amalek's hand attacking God's throne? Is it Moses' hand lifting up to God? Is it a hand at all, or is this a metaphor for something else? There are so many understandings of this one little verse, and it is difficult because it's kind of poetic. And in many name descriptions, it tends to be a little bit poetic. And then the next half of the verse, God has a war with Amalek from generation to generation. So this little phrase, what's interesting is how people understood it over time, because it's always been difficult to understand. And so one way they understood it is reflected in the fragment Targum. So Targum means it's a translation to Aramaic of the Hebrew text. And whenever you translate, just like we saw in English, you have to fill things in. English is a different language. I can't say for a hand on God's throne. I have to put a verb in there. So it has for a hand was lifted up to the throne of the Lord. You kind of have to make sense of it. You have to, as a translator, try to figure out what does this really mean and help the meaning go through to the new language. So they're doing that in Aramaic, and I'm not going to read it all. But this particular translation in Aramaic is a bit more midrashic. It will put in more than just it's more paraphrastic than just a translation, and you get some interpretation in there. But all translations have some interpretation. So we have the translation here. And he said an oath is going out from under the seat of the honor of the ruler of the universe. So he's interpreting the translation here that it's God taking an oath. There is coming a king in the future who will arise from the house of Israel, Saul, son of Kish. He will wage war with those of the house of Amalek and will kill off kings and rulers from them. And whatever is left over from them, Mordechai and Esther will defeat in Shushan, the capital. Obviously, the fragment Targum is later, so they have the whole story in front of them. But they are connecting here this concept of a hand on God's throne being a king. When there's a king on the throne, that's when God's going to have war with Amalek. So, the hand in this interpretation is the future king. There are other ways to interpret, and you could say that the hand being the future king, when Samuel comes in 1 Samuel 15, and he says, now that God has given you rest from your enemies, you need to go out attack Amalek. You could also see that as interpreting this verse. Hey, you're the first king, you're on the throne. You need to go wage war with Amalek now that you're king. So, that was one interpretation we see of this verse. Another one is reflected in the Greek translation. So the Greek translation, what we call the Septuagint, was done around 250 BC, okay, before Jesus by 250 years. And they're reading this verse, trying to make sense of it. And what's not clear to us when we read the Greek, we can see what they were seeing in the Hebrew. We don't know, was that a written text they saw, or was it in their brain that they switched it? But it's as if they read something different in Hebrew. Instead of saying, for a hand on God's throne, they flipped al and yad, that word, and they joined the word kesya together, which makes the word ksuya. Now that's a strange little word, but lechasot is to cover something up. Ksuya would be the feminine form of covered. So, instead of saying, for a hand on God's throne, kesya, it has for by a hand that is covered. God has war with Amalek. Ki al yad ksuya. So if you know any Hebrew and you look at the yellow, you can see how that could have happened. So again, we don't know, were they reading a different Hebrew text than the Hebrew text we have today? Or was it in their own mind it flipped? But what they translated was, by a hidden hand. En cheri krufea. By a hidden hand, God wages war against Amalek from generation to generation. So this is very interesting to me, because if you understand this battle in Exodus 17, that at the conclusion, God is waging a war by a hidden hand against Amalek in every generation, and now I want to tell the story of Esther, that's going to impact how I tell the story. And I'm going to want to show how this is a continuation of this first battle. Therefore, I'm going to want to show that God's hand is hidden, because he's waging war with a hidden hand. And so, to me, I see this as possibly a reason why an author would want to mute God, so to speak, because he's trying to show how the story of Esther is actually confirming this verse in Exodus, that God's waging war against Amalek with his hidden hand. And he shows so many coincidences, quote coincidences, that he's hinting that it is God. It's not just random, but it is being hidden from you, in the sense of, you're seeing the human plane and not the divine. So, another thing we see, there's a standing and a sitting motif. If you were to look at the Exodus story we just read about Amalek in its context of the story before and after, you'll see that Moses and God are described quite often, like they're standing, they're sitting, and there's kind of ironies going on there. We don't have time to go into all of it, but you kind of get, again, this like stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down. It's a little bit funny, actually. And it's interesting that when you get to Esther, I know a lot of the retellings kind of mute this particular facet, but Haman gets mad twice at Mordecai. So the first time, Esther, we're back in Esther. Esther chapter 3, verse 5. Haman is mad that Mordecai doesn't bow down or pay homage to him. So the words in Hebrew is korea, which is like crouch. Mishtahave is to like bow down. So the problem is he's not bowing down. But then you get to Esther 5:9, and what's he mad about? All of a sudden, it doesn't matter if he's not bowing down. He's not standing up. He doesn't rise or tremble in his presence. Velo kam velo za. He doesn't stand up and he doesn't move. So they're opposites. And so it's curious to me that, and it's kind of funny, because he's mad at him. He can't be happy either way. You bow down or you don't bow down, he's not happy. You don't stand up, he's not happy. There's just any extreme, he's not happy. And you see, again, these themes of standing, sitting, or in this case, even falling. And falling, it's interesting because at the end of the book, after things start going towards the Jews' side, you have this repetition of falling in several idioms that you could have said elsewise. We have the fear of the Jews had overcome them. So in our English, I used here the Net translation. It doesn't reflect this idiom fall, but it says fear fell. The fear of the Jews fell on them. So you have this repetition of falling. And in Esther 9:2, everyone's afraid. No one stood up against them because fear had fallen on them. So you have standing and falling. And then later on also, the next verse, again, fear falls on them. So it doesn't happen once, it happens several times. They could have said the same thing with other words, but they chose these words. And I think there is some kind of motif of rising, falling And it's kind of a burlesque in a way. It's a poetic justice, really. And we have it in the Song of the Sea. So this is not in the Amalek battle, but it is 2 chapters before, Exodus 15, right after they cross the Red Sea. Verse 16, fear and dread will fall on them. And again, by the greatness of your arm, God's arm, they will be still as stone until your people pass by, O Lord, until the people whom you have bought pass by. So the song that commemorates the victory of them crossing through the Red Sea, miraculously, mentions this fear falling on them at the greatness of God's arm. And so I kind of see this in combination in Esther. When this fear is falling on the people, it is, this is poetry. It's hard to fulfill poetry. I mean, prophecy is also poetry. But in some ways, it's a fulfillment of this Song of the Sea, where fear will fall on these people when they see the greatness of your arm. And so it also confirms that it's God's great arm in action when you see fear falling on them, if you reverse that logic. And that's right before the battle with Amalek. And it ties also into the rising and falling theme. So even in Psalm 105, verse 38, which is a historical psalm, it mentions the fear falling on them in Egypt. Egypt is happy when the people leave because fear of them had fallen on them. So it seems to be connected with a miraculous action of God. The people leaving Israel, going through the Red Sea, this is like God's business card of miracles. This is a great miracle how God redeemed his people. And so, and recorded here in this psalm. And so again, in Esther, we see this fear falling on them is a confirmation that this is a miraculous miracle by the great arm of God. It's not a coincidence. And we have this little phrase also in 1 Samuel 11:7. In this case, it's let's read it here. Whoever does not go out after Saul and after Samuel should expect this to be done to his oxen when he chopped it up. Then the terror of the Lord fell on the people, and they went out as one army. So fear of God also falls on the people. It's the same phrase, the pahad, the fear falls on the people. But in this case, it's the people of Israel that have the fear of God fall on them. So we have this fear falling in Exodus, in this miraculous leaving Egypt, splitting the sea. We have it in Saul's war. And then also elsewhere in Job 13:11, referring to God's fear falling in you. And then in Esther, you have it a lot. So first the fear falls because of the Jews. And then with the third mention, it's because of Mordechai getting promoted to second in command. And Mordechai is in control of the king's army in the end. And so I think this repeated phrase is saying a lot. It's referencing a lot. Also in Esther 5:14, Haman's wife Zeresh and all his friends say to him, "Have a gallows 75 feet high built, and in the morning tell the king that Mordechai should be hanged on it. Then go with the king to the banquet, contented." And he has that, built. But then the next chapter, when they find out what happened, Zeresh, the wife, says, "If indeed this Mordechai, before whom you have begun to fall," interesting. She's already seeing that. You've begun to fall. "If he is Jewish, you will not prevail against him. No, you will surely fall before him." So she gets prophetic. And she's using, again, this imagery of rising and falling. And if you notice here, she is assuming if he's Jewish, there's no way you can prevail. So again, we have this dichotomy of Amalek. Either Amalek's up or Israel's up. It can't be both. For them to go up, the other goes down. And this reference to you have begun falling, that's very strange. But she uses it. And you will surely fall. And of course, in the story, we see that he does surely fall. In falling, he is ironically hung up really high on the gallows. So again, you have the up and down thing. So I would say all through Esther, there's a very conscious use of up and down in the language. It's not random, it's purposeful. You have standing and falling motifs, and it's all going back again to the bigger picture of God's miracles. It's also a little humorous sometimes and exaggerated. It's using burlesque, and it makes more sense when you're thinking about it in the background of the original battle with Amalek. And when one is up, the other has to be down. And you see, there's other reversals. We can't get into everything, but peripety would be like an exact reversal, where there was going to be mourning and now there's joy. Or if it mentions in every nation a nation, at the end it mentions every nation a nation. First there's mourning for the Jews and there's happiness for the Jews. Also the places where the word of the king and his decree arrived is repeated in Esther 8. So you see that there's intentionality in how the author is writing this story. So in Esther chapter 4, he's setting up this great catastrophe, and the very words he's using then get reused in the reversal in chapter 8. And so all of these are very carefully chosen words to kind of accentuate this point of reversal. And you can see like exact reversals in the wording. So that's just for any who are still in doubt whether anything I'm saying is really legitimate. Like, wait, what are you saying? And it's very intentional. And there are many little threads like this. And the more you see them, the more you're kind of in awe of this story and the intricacies. They're deliberate, they're beautiful, and it takes you to notice these little literary links. And when you do, there's no way you can say, oh, well, these are just coincidences. These are very clearly intentional little things all along the way that actually imply all these, quote, coincidences are not coincidences. They have to be the hand of God. So taking it back to us, what's a takeaway? For one, tonight, I hope that you are inspired to read your Bible closer, as much as you can. Appreciate each little word choice as much as you can. If you're able to go to the original languages, all the better. If not, there are so many resources now. Net Bible will always talk about translation choices for words. They'll have Net Bible is a free online version, and all translations are the same. Everyone asks what's the best translation. It doesn't exist. All translations are translations. But the nice thing with the net is they'll have little notes why they chose this, or what the debate was here, whether this word is unclear, what else it could mean. So you can go to the translation, click on their little footnote, and it gives you a nice little synopsis. But to appreciate God's word as literature, it doesn't take away from the meaning, it adds to the meaning and the impact. And to allow the way it's presented be authentic. So if it's presented in burlesque, because that's a powerful form to do it in, let it be that. Don't try to iron it out and make it a newspaper. You actually detract from the story instead of what I'm assuming you're trying to do and uplift it. And so notice these little links and the ironies, the beautiful way God works in life. It makes you laugh even in serious times, when you see these, oh wow, that is such an ironic reversal. And it keeps you interested in coming back for more. And of course, the funny irony that I said at the beginning of the book is, if the goal of the law was to keep the king's word strong and keep women in their place, that's completely thrown on its head when a foreign woman, no less, finds a way to thwart the king's word, this irrevocable word, and she can work around it. And so it's kind of like in your face. And again, that just accentuates who's really in control, because we all know like a foreign, essentially slave woman in this case, doesn't have any power, doesn't have any control. So for her to get where she got to, it had to be part of a design of a master plan. So God is at work behind the scenes. Even today, he's at work in funny, ironic ways behind the scenes, and he is still in control, and his hand is still active. And another thing is, let's not join Amalek's camp. Let's be for God, for his people. We are part of his people, entering into his covenant. And the people of Israel are his people. And we don't want to go against that. We want to be with God.